Another example of degeneration can be found in the USA, in the Pacific Northwest states of Oregon and Washington, as well as Northern California. In that region, about 30 cooperatives producing plywood were set up in between 1921 and the early 1950s. By 1974, 18 of these co-ops were still in existence, and research conducted in the 1970s and 80s showed that the co-ops had an advantage over other firms in the industry in that their workers, who of course were also the owners, required much less supervision in order to produce equal or greater amounts of wood. Also, in hard times, the worker members were also more willing to take pay cuts in order to reduce costs, ensure the survival of the business, and prevent layoffs. However, due to a number of recessions and increasing competition from low-wage states in the American South, by the mid-1980s, a number of the cooperatives had been forced out of business. As for the more successful ones, they began to experience the process of degeneration. Workers who had contributed $1,000 or $2,000 when the co-ops were founded, and who were now preparing for retirement, found that the market valuation of their shares ranged from $25,000 to as much as $80,000, and the temptation of cashing in proved to be too great. They sold their shares to outside investors, usually larger lumber companies. Additionally, the forces of degeneration were at work. The cooperatives had always hired in non-members as part of the labor force, even if only temporarily, in order to cope with seasonal upswings in demand. As the original founder members grew older and wealthier, the proportion of the workforce made up by these hired employees grew, so that eventually most of the wood was being produced by non-members. In this way, the cooperatives gradually lost their cooperative character and were transformed into conventional capitalist firms. So we've seen some real-life examples of degeneration. But what about the big picture? Does the experience of the Israeli agricultural cooperatives and some 2.5 plywood cooperatives in the U.S. mean that the entire cooperative sector worldwide is doomed to stagnation due to the forces of degeneration and the difficulties that cooperatives face in accessing outside finance without losing their cooperative character? Let's look at the statistical evidence from two countries with large populations of cooperatives, France and Italy. As of 2012, France had over 21,000 cooperatives with a total of over 23 million members. Italy had almost 70,000 co-ops with about 13 million members. Now, many of these co-ops are financial co-ops, including mutual insurance companies or savings and loan associations, or agricultural producers co-ops. So a relatively small number of them are worker co-ops in manufacturing or non-financial services, meaning that membership of 36 million does not translate into employment of 36 million in the sector. In France, employment in the sector as a whole is around 1 million, which is between 3 and 4.5% of the working population of the country. And in Italy, about 400,000 are employed in worker co-ops, and about twice that in the co-op sector as a whole. Perhaps surprisingly, the co-op sector in the USA accounts for 2 million jobs. So while it is far from being a dominant employer, the cooperative sector is also far from extinction.